so Nerdboy and E-Girl were thoroughly shocked. Turning to the direction that the hookshot came from, they saw the burly figure of Qin Wen coming out of the earthen house with one of his arms extended like a rope. His hands took the form of the hookshot. He kept on repeating that the Darksiders were responsible for this. The hookshot and the long rope quickly flexed back into its arm-length form. Qin Wen deliriously chanted that he was the only one who could save all of them from the Darksiders. They should listen to his orders if they want to be saved. Luluo was still inside the house, and she was the closest one to the madman. She didn't have a clear view of his face, so she wasn't sure if this guy had turned to the dark side completely. The obscure darkness in his face and the glaring light in his eyes pretty much confirmed it. But the odd thing was, Qin Wen had not stopped proclaiming that he was just protecting the group. In his perspective, they were the ones who did not understand. Realizing that this guy was already a lost cause, Luluo tried to run past him out of the doorway with all the speed that she could muster. Out of desperation and fear, she managed to run away pretty far from the partially transformed Darksider to warn the others that Qin Wen had fallen to depravity. Hookshot Boy still had some brain cells left to feel wronged by the fact that his so-called comrades were not listening to a word that he was saying. Luluo was even running away from him like he was a monster. So, like a sane and normal human, he yelled that everyone would die by his hands as he readied his hookshot arm for another round of launch. Before Qin Wen could extend his rope to blast his hookshot off, the earthen house behind him started cracking by itself, caving in out of nowhere. When it finally collapsed in one fell swoop, the heavy chunks of solid rocks dogpiled on top of the hookshot Darksider as Luluo continued running, only turning around to see the destruction behind her. Like always, after seeing something bad happen, Luluo's first thought was to blame herself for everything. Chungjun and Liu Fengyuan were also safe as they were far from the collapse. They were both confused as Qin Wen had never gotten into direct contact with Darksiders. They did not even consider such a wild variable in their escape plan. Miss E-Girl snapped out of her confusion to grab the gobsmacked Luluo from where she was fearfully standing. She was the only one who kept her wits about her. She knew that a Darksider was not like the zombies from movies. Besides, they had no idea how these monsters mutate. She also urged the nerd to start running unless he thought he could fight against a Darksider. From the collapsed house, the sinister hook shot from before forced its way out of the heavy debris, homing in on the fleeing group. Thankfully, Luluo decided to look back in a panic, urging the target of the hook, Liu Fengyuan, to dodge to the side. Miss E-Girl also turned around to see that the sharp metal tip was about to pierce through her body. But before the hook shot even got remotely close to her, a piece of solid land protruded out of nowhere to stop the seemingly unstoppable momentum of the hook. Instead of skewering the E-Girl's lithe body, it was halted by some earth-bending hocus-pocus. Liu Fengyuan looked at the halted tip of metal glistening with the reflection from the sunlight fearfully. Had the earth not decided to intervene, she would have been done. The hook part of the weapon was lodged too tightly on the rock, but there was some trembling happening at the other side of the rope, the spot where the earthen house had collapsed. Using the flexibility of the elastic rope going back to its original length, Qin Wen the Darksider escaped the weight of the debris unscathed. He was still blabbering on about how it was the Darksider's fault that all of this was happening. His other hand balled into a fist as it also started turning into a foreign material, his flesh gaining a different property. Qin Wen kept on going on and on about how the group needed him and that they would not survive without his help. An invisible hand stopped his overgrown fist before it reached the other survivors. Based on the sizes alone, it looked like a massive mismatch, but the invisible hand stood steady. Li Chengyin finally decided to show up at the perfect junction. His body was in the position of the earth wall that stopped the hook shot in the first place. This was his first time witnessing the process of a human mutating into a grotesque Darksider. He must admit that this Qin Wen fella seemed to be a bit special. Mr. Hookshot. Darksider was still cognizant that someone was stopping his attacks. He could feel it, but he could not see the landlord's form. As far as Qin Wen was aware, although the mysterious presence looked like a part of the land, there was a clear consciousness at play. Then why would a non-human stop him? In Qin Wen's deluded brain, he was just doing his best to protect the group, so how was he in the wrong? Li Chengyin curiously asked if this was true. If that's the case, then he and Qin Wen might have something in common. He wanted to know if the former Mr. Buzzkill could still keep his own identity as a human even after mutation. Qin Wen answered that he and the other 3 survivors were fellow students, friends even. Those simple facts would never change. He so desperately wanted to save them, but it was manifesting in a messed up way. He just kept on convincing himself that he could save everyone and that this was the only way to do so. As a mutated creature himself, Li Chengyin's instincts were telling him that the guy was not lying, or at least he thought that what he was saying and doing was the absolute truth. If that was the case, since he was able to get along with Lu Luo, then why couldn't Qin Wen? There was a possibility that the answer lay in the eyes. The mark of hatred and darkness was apparent in Qinwen's eyes. The Darksider's other arm finally finished its mutation, taking the form of multiple flexible ropes with a high degree of toughness. They easily tore through Li Chengyin's earthwall body. Those ropes found their way toward the body of poor Chengjun. They did not run when they had the chance to do so. Now the nerd was paying the price. Li Chenyin turned around to see the damage done for not taking the other mutated arm into account with his earth defense. Qinwen's transformation was closing in on 100%. All the human traces on his face were gone and replaced by the monstrous features of a Darksider. He started yapping about how his friends were infected by the dark element and how he must destroy those that were infected to save them once and for all. Nerd guy Chengjun was shocked by the betrayal of his close friend and still couldn't believe that Qinwen had become his killer. The poor guy died like that, killed by his best friend, who had now turned into a monster. In the next instant, Chengjun's breathless body was already falling to the ground. Liu Fengyuan only managed to shout his name in despair, but it was already useless. Chengjun could no longer hear anything in this life. She only had to regret the decision to stop in this cursed place, but nothing could be changed anymore. Now the girls needed to think about themselves and run away as soon as possible, saving their lives. Even though Chengjun was dead, Darksider Qinwen was not going to stop. Everything was not enough for him, and he was not going to let his past friends run away and abandon him. In his altered mind, only he could protect them, and if they didn't want that protection, then they shouldn't live. The girls barely made it to the cliff, but it wasn't enough. The Darksider's attack caught up with them, and here, and escaping the blow, they jumped into the unknown. The cliff was too high. There were several dozen meters to the ground. Liu Fengyuan in flight already realized that this was the end, and here they would die. She was beginning to blame herself for putting them all in this situation. After all, she was the one who had initiated the expedition to find Luluo, even though it was very dangerous and it was unknown how humans mutated into Darksiders. In the end, she came to the conclusion that it was her fault, and it was because of her that her friends died. So resigned to her near death, she closed her eyes and was ready to trust fate. To her surprise, she didn't feel the hard impact on the ground. Instead, she and Luluo hit the slope that had just appeared below them, and rolled down it like a kid's slide. Of course, Liu Fengyuan was too surprised by this turn of events and made the critical mistake of flipping to the other side. Now she was breaking with her face, and already at the bottom, she had to spit out the earth and sand from her mouth. Now her face had the full palette of scratches and bruises. Still, this was many times better than death, and Liu Fengyuan couldn't believe her luck. Looking back, she wondered why the terrain had so suddenly changed right below them. It was still hard for her to understand how she had survived such a fall. Lulo hurriedly hugged her friend and reassuringly asked her if she was all right. However, Liu Fengyuan was not someone who needed to be comforted. The only thing she was interested in right now was what the hell was going on. Lulo was just about to explain to her, even though it would be quite difficult to believe her words. But she was sure that they shouldn't run away from this place. After all, there is our hero Li Chenyin, who will definitely solve all the problems, and he would keep them safe in this world full of dangers. Meanwhile, up above, our hero was just solving the problem with the Darksider. The mutated Qinwen was quite unhappy with the fact that some piece of land was preventing him from being with his friends and made him miss them. He couldn't wait to continue saving them. Darksider was now going to destroy his enemy, who was preventing him from moving on to saving people. Our hero, of course, thought that such logic looked very dubious. How could you even think that killing your friends would save them? Where is there any sanity in that? Li Chenyin was wrong to think that he could negotiate with him, and that's why Chengjun died. Our hero was too stupid to think that Qinwen could be like himself and could continue to live the life of a reasonable person after mutation. But in the end, Qinwen turned out to be just another ordinary dumb Darksider, without a shadow of human consciousness and only with instincts to kill and meaningless muttering. Such an exceptionally harmful monster could now be disposed of without a trace of regrets. Feeling Li Chenyin prepare for battle and activate his power, the Darksider tensed up and was simply shocked by so many dark elements. He immediately rushed into the attack, intending to save them all, whatever meaning he put into those words. Our hero tried to stop his hook attack with his hand. However, this turned out to be a bad idea. The hook simply destroyed his arm and pierced through his body. Li Chenyin was surprised to see such strength of a Darkseer. Is this monster really that strong? After pondering, our hero decided that it wasn't. It was just that he himself had become too weak. And the reason was very simple. In this mountainous area, the soil was too stony with little ground. And now, even though he had moved some of his land here, the amount of ground here was still insufficient, and so the amount of his strength was greatly reduced. While the Darksider was full of strength and energy, he continued his ramblings, sure that only he could save people, and this piece of land was a monster. In a way, our hero even felt sorry for him. Now that he was a common Darksider, he had nowhere to go. Those exposed